I work at Interdyne, and I do a lot of the management reporter training and FRX stuff and budgeting and all kinds of good stuff that deal with reporting. So, and it's actually kind of timely. You know, as I was telling Kim earlier, that I said that twice this week I'd have actually people come up to me and ask me about the very topic that we're actually covering today. So I thought this was a very timely presentation that we were going to do on this webinar. So with that, what I'd like to actually cover today is the reporting groups, what they are, what they do, the infamous library, and what is the library, and how can you secure the library, and how do you set up security so that you can make reports do what you want and not have to run things multiple times. So we're going to talk about all of those topics. I did throw in at the end a little bit about the web viewer. If you were on one of my presentations, I think it was a couple weeks ago, we had a very in-depth overview of the web viewer and what you could do with it. But because when you're using report groups, it does rely on the web viewer, I threw a couple things in there as well, just so that we can kind of do a little refresher on that. And for those of you that have never seen it before, you can actually get a feel for what the web viewer is about as well. So there is a slide deck with this that kind of walks us through, you know, how to do some of the setup and stuff. So if you're interested in the slide deck at the end, if you want to contact Kim, she'll have a PDF copy of this that we can email you so that you can actually have maybe some documentation on what it is that we talked about and how I got there. At the end, I will be going into the product and I will be showing you live demo of how it works in action. So if you have any questions at that point, we'll open it up and you guys can ask. You can ask away, and we'll just, you know, I'll shoot off the cuff and we'll get your stuff answered. Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So let's talk about security. In Management Reporter, it is unlike the way your GP actually works. With GP, you can use Windows authentication, but the majority of people are probably still using SQL authentication. But in Management Reporter, everything is Windows-based, so it is controlled by your Active Directory. Users have to be set up in the Active Directory in order to be added to Management Reporter. So when we get to the point and we start talking about distribution and being able to send these reports to your end users, if you want them to be able to view any of these reports online, they would need to be a member of your Active Directory. Typically, I usually say, well, they have to be able to connect to a VPN, but I have read documentation recently about how to actually get your web viewer link so that it can be outside the firewall so people could actually access it. They would still obviously need to be an Active Directory user on the server, but those kinds of things are possible. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to get into setting up users. So in order to do a lot of the things that I want to talk about today, you know, it deals with users and groups and how to best manage that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was how do you actually set up a user. So while you're in Management Reporter, you're actually going to click on the Security tab. Now, depending on the type of user that you are set up as, some people will actually have this ability to do this and others will not. You will have to be set up as an administrator to even see this tab. But it's kind of like the putting the cart before the horse, or, you know, we have to talk about one, but if you aren't this, you wouldn't be able to do it anyway. So you need to click on the Security tab. You can click on the New button, and it's actually going to pop up a new user window. So once you click on the Search button, this is where your Active Directory piece comes in. So you can type in a partial of their name, you can type in their full name, whatever, hit check names, and then when you hit OK, it's actually going to add that user back in here into Security. So once you create the user, now you have to choose what type of a role do you want that user to have. You have 4 types of roles here. You have a viewer, a generator, a designer, and an administrator. As an administrator, you have rights to all things within the application. This is not a network administrator. This is just an administrator within the Management Reporter application, which means you can do all things. You have rights to all companies by default. As a designer, you have rights to only those companies that you have been given access to. So once you've been given access to that company, then you have all rights within that company, except for security type items, okay? As a generator, you would only have the ability to generate a report that has already been created. You wouldn't be able to modify any of the rows, the columns, the trees, or anything like that, and you'd only be able to generate for companies that you were given rights to. As a viewer, you wouldn't even be allowed into the designer module. You would have to go, you would only be able to look at reports that had previously been generated by somebody else. Okay? These tasks, these roles that you see here are different than the way they work in GP, in the fact that GP allows you to change your tasks and roles, and you can customize these. These roles are not customizable. Once you give somebody a role, they have all the rights within that role. Okay? So once you choose the role, then you're going to need to go in and at that point you could actually give them company rights there, or you could set up groups and assign company security based on groups as well. So I want to talk about groups as well and how you set up groups. Groups are going to be very similar to like having groups on your network administrator, you know, in the Active Directory. So like when somebody new joins the company, you usually say, okay, well, what department are they in, or what group are they in? And you can say, okay, well, they're part of the accounting group. You can give them rights to the accounting group, and so then they have rights to all of the file shares and applications and things like that that the accounting group would have. All those kind of groups work the same way in Management Reporter, that when you create a group, you can add users to a group, and then you can assign security to a group so that when you need to add new users or assign new securities or whatever, you can assign it to a group, and then if you've got changeover or whatever, all you have to do is add a new user to the group, and then they have all the rights that that user, that any other user in that group would have. So this is going to play a bigger part when we start talking about the library and what you can do with tree security and some of that sort of stuff. So to set up a group, again, you're going to click on the Security tab, and now instead of clicking on the New button, you're going to click on the drop-down for New, and then click on the Group button. And then this is going to allow you to type in a group name, and then you can click the Add, and then now is where you're going to be able to see all the users that are available, and you can click on the user you want, and it would add them to the group. Okay? So once you've got your users added to the group, you can click on the Company Access, and this would be one way as an addition to, instead of having to go user by user as to what rights they have, if you needed to, say you have a group that has rights to this company and a group that has rights to this company, you could set up a group and assign the company rights to the group and then add those users to the group. All right, and I'm going to show you this a little bit more as we go through, but I wanted to give you the general guidelines and the setup of where do you set this stuff up, okay? So how is it applied? Well, it works in a couple different ways. Well, one, you have to have users set up, and you have to have them assigned to a particular role so that they have access to the application in general. But you can also assign, and this is a piece that people usually forget, is the library. We're going to talk about the library and what that is, but unless you're an administrator who has rights by default, nobody has rights to the library until they're given it. So you definitely need to make sure that you go into the library and you start giving rights to users in the library as well. Now what the library is where the published reports are generated. So if you don't give somebody rights to the library, they're not even going to be able to generate any reports because they're not going to have rights to the folders to actually publish them. So it's kind of like when you have an Excel file open and somebody says, oh, save it up to this accounting folder, but they don't have rights to that accounting folder, so they don't even see the folder. They can't even get in. Okay, so same kind of concept. And then also within trees. When you assign security within a tree, let's say you have like a departmental tree, what that does is it allows you to assign branch by branch of your tree who has rights to each of those branches. So say you have a departmental tree and you want only Joe to have access to the accounting department and Susie to have access to the marketing department. You can set that up so that as you generate that report, it embeds the security into that tree. So when they open that report, they can only open the pieces of the report that you have given them rights to. So it allows you to generate the report in total for the entire company and only have to generate it once. And then when you publish that report and you give rights to that report, as people open it, they can only open the pieces that you gave them rights to. Okay, so we're going to show you how to do that too. And that's essentially what I was talking about here, that you're personalizing the secured view of the data and that you can publish out one file for all your users, and each user only sees the information that report that they've been given security to. So we'll do this as a demo as well, but just as a precursor to that, you're going to open up your tree, you're going to click on the security, and it's going to bring up your security screen. And at this point, this is where you can start using either individual users or groups. So this is where it can be very handy. Even if you have groups that are set up as a one-to-one basis, you have only one person in that group, you assign the group to the branch. And then as you have turnover or you need to add new people and you add them to the group, wherever that group is being used, they will automatically get rights to that. Versus if you set up a new user and you have 15 trees created and they all have security in them, now you got to go to all those trees and make sure that that person has the appropriate security. Where if you set up a group, those groups are already established in the tree and you add that user to the group, now you've just updated the security for all of those trees as well. Or folders in the library for that matter. All right, so let's talk about the report library. So this is one of the things that I find people have the most curiosity about because they know the least about it. So a lot of people are coming off of FRX and they're used to the structure of the way FRX generates a report. So on FRX, you would go in and you'd be able to generate a report and you told it what file folder you wanted to save the report to. And there was even an option there that says, hey, just replace the file without warning. Well, in Management Reporter, you have to choose a file location in the library that you want to generate a report to. However, it does not save or replace the existing. It puts a new version on top of the old version. And when you generate a report, there is no other option to generate it to other than the library. Once you get it in the library, you can then print it to a PDF, you can export it to Excel, you can do those kinds of things. But every single report always generates to the library, and it puts a new version on top of the old version. So we need to somehow come up with a way to manage that and make sure that people realize that if you generate a report 5 times during the day, you are going to have 5 copies of that report in your library. This is a piece that usually people don't realize that this is happening, and then a couple months later they'll call me, and maybe it's not a couple months, maybe it might be a year or 2 later, they'll call and say, why is my Management Reporter database so big? And it's because this library is actually located within the SQL database, the Management Reporter database, and because it's putting a new version on top of the old version and it doesn't replace it, it just puts a new version on top, every single report is going to be saved in that database. So if we don't eventually go in and remove the draft versions or the unwanted copies of those reports, your database is going to exponentially grow every single month. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that. What are good ways to be able to identify reports that we want to eliminate, and do we want to keep a repository of historical reports, and how do we do that? How do we set up our folder structure, and how do we customize it to be the way we want to organize it? And that was one of the reasons why we asked, how are you storing your reports currently? You know, do you want to keep online copies of reports? Do you want them to be available to people to look at them online later on? Would you like people to be able to click on a report and say, show me the previous version of a report? And how does all that come into play when you are not removing day 1, day 2, day 3 versions of reports. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. We'll go into the library and I'll show you some examples of that. I just wanted to, like I said, I wanted to be able to give you guys a PDF of what we talked about. So I wanted to give you an example of a library structure, and this can be totally customized however you guys want to do it. This is just an example of one of the ways that I've suggested to people if they need options. But I like to come in order to get to the library, I suppose I should first start off is in order to be able to actually get to the library, you have to use the desktop version, the desktop viewer, rather than the web viewer. The desktop viewer is what's going to allow you to get into the library and see the structure. So you'll notice down here at the bottom, you've got 2 panels in the desktop viewer. You've got the library and you've got the data. And I can actually show you when we do a demo version of this how to switch your viewer from using the web viewer to using the desktop viewer, or if you still like using the web viewer, how you can actually get your report once you're looking at it in the web viewer to open in the desktop viewer if you need to manage something or whatever. So you'll notice down here you've got the report library, which is going to give you a listing of all the reports that have been published. And then you've also got the report data, which would be the generated version of that report. So once you're in the library, like I said, you can create any kind of directory structure that makes sense for your organization. In this example, I have a draft folder, and then I also have a year folder, and then under that year folder, I put the various years, and I put the fiscal periods underneath. And then you can publish to each of those various different folders. So we'll talk about the best ways of being able to publish to those folders and using the draft folder and being able to identify the things that you want to actually delete periodically throughout the month, or maybe you just have a one-time month end and you just delete all the extra stuff right before you publish final versions of reports. All right. So one of the things I also wanted to show you is that if you click on a report and you say show versions, this is how you're going to be able to see that you have multiple versions of that report. So if you're thinking, well, I don't see multiple versions of my report, if you're publishing them in the same folder all the time and it's got the same name, it's just going to start putting one on top of the other, so it doesn't look like you have 50 bazillion copies in there. But if you actually do a right click and say show versions on your reports, you may come to find that you've got 2 years worth of historical reports, in there. And they may not all be final versions, because I'm sure nobody runs the same report 5 times in a day just to figure out, oh, hey, I need to take a format change, or, whatever. It happens. We've all done it. All right, so report groups. What are report groups and what can I do with these? Well, what a report group is it basically allows you to generate a list of reports simultaneously. So it allows you to group those reports together, click a button, choose a time frame, and have all of those reports generate. You can create many reports in a single report group. You can create multiple report groups that might have various combinations. So say you create 3 different report groups. You could have one report in all 3 of those report groups if you wanted to. It all depends on what you need your report group to actually do. Maybe you have a report group that gives you all of the month-end reports. Maybe you have another report group that gives you the board reports. Maybe you have a group report, a report group that gives you, these are the reports that I need for the bank. Okay? So lots of different options. You can set up many groups, and you're not necessarily limited to it. Like I said, different reports can be included in many different report groups. Report groups are nice because, remember I was talking about being able to publish reports in a particular folder in the library. Well, it's all great to have, all of these different folders in the library to be able to publish reports to. But who wants to go through 50 reports and have to change the path of where that report is going to save every time you want to generate it? That's where reports can come in and allow you to distribute all of the reports in the report group to a single location in the library. So maybe you set up all your reports to default to the draft folder so that if you run them on a one-off basis, they always go to the draft folder. But then when you run the report group, you can say, okay, well, these are going to be my January reports, and I want to put these in my January folder. And report groups will allow you to do that. So setting up a report group, you're going to be in Designer, and you're going to click on the report group panel over on the left-hand side, and then you're going to click the new button. And you'll notice that I keep saying click on the new button, and if you click on the panel on the left-hand side for the building block group that you want to create, so whether it be security, groups, columns, rows, trees, that new button automatically switches to whatever panel you've just clicked on. Okay? Now you can always click on the drop down on the side and click create anything at any point from whatever place you're in. But if you click on the panel first, that icon changes. Okay? So from here, you're going to click the add button, and it's going to allow you to add any grouping of any of the listed reports that you have in your building block group. If you click the shift key or the control key, it'll allow you to select multiple ones at a time, so you don't have to, try and add 50 reports one at a time. Once you have your report group created, when you go to generate a report, this is where you can override some of the individual settings on some of the individual reports. So you can change the company if you needed to. You can change the time frame. And it allows you to generate all your reports for a specific time frame. Now, one of the things I'm going to kind of show you when we get into the demo piece is we'll talk a little bit more about the detail level and the provisional levels. If you deselect this override company detail, excuse me, and date setting from the individual report definitions, so this option right up here, all this becomes grayed out, and what does that mean? Okay, so I'll show you that when we get into the demo portion. The other thing, and this is, I will show you a demo of this, but I wanted to at least have a slide so you had documentation of it, was you've got whatever library directory structure established that when you're in the report group, you can choose a different library in the output and distribution. So here are the 3 ways that you can actually choose where you want the report to go. So this one happens to be on a report definition. You can choose this folder right here and change the location. Or in the group distribution, you can change the folder there. Or again, on the report group, you can do it as a report distribution. And then you can choose to override the individual report or the group location and have it go where you want. I'm going to show you more detail of where that comes into play when we do the demo. Okay. The other thing I want to kind of briefly mention as well is once you have your report groups created, now one of the things that I've noticed for people is, they really like the idea of being able to generate all the reports at the same time. And that usually satisfies their desire of being able to generate reports, but occasionally people do want to be able to actually schedule reports as well. And I think people have that desire a little bit more before you could run them all together. Because they were thinking, oh, I got to run all these 50 reports and it takes me forever to run them one by one. The report group allowed you to, kind of essentially take that task away and be able to do what just one foul swoop. But you do have the ability to still schedule reports if you want as well. So you can schedule individual reports or you can schedule group reports. And I'll show you that when we get into the demo as well. And how you can actually change where you want your files to actually go. When you generate a report group, and I've had questions on this from people before, they always open in Web Viewer. Even if you have the desktop viewer, default viewer, the Web Viewer will open when you generate a report group. And this is called the group distribution. So whichever groups you had or reports you had included in that group are not going to show up as a link here as one of these green boxes. All right. So one of the really cool things about running things to the web viewer as a group is down here under your download option, you have the ability to export all of these reports to an Excel file. So what that's going to do is every single report is going to show up as a different tab in a single Excel workbook. Now, depending on how you run the report at a financial or account level or a financial account and transaction level, all those tabs will show up. So if you only need the financial piece, then you'd want to change that detail level to only be financial. If you want the financial and the account level, then you need to have that on the report group before you generate it. If you've got some reports you need as financial only and some reports that you need as an account level, you'd have to let the individual report define what detail level is included in the report group. And I will show you how to do that when we actually get into the demo portion. All right. So not only can you export this to Excel, but if you click the download button and you click the XPS viewer, it will now send all of your reports to an XPS file that you can then print. This is a new addition to CU15. Previously, when you tried to print stuff, I mean, they had the option to be able to do things to XPS, but it wasn't pretty and people didn't like it. But they really added a lot of functionality to this with CU15. So that may be a reason to upgrade if you're looking for such things. Okay. This can be very nice. All right. This is where I wanted to kind of give you that quick overview of the web viewer, and we can do this as a demo as well. But if you open the reports independently, you're going to have this on the bottom. And again, this is a screenshot of CU15. So this may look slightly different if you're not on CU15. You may not have all of these options, depending on the version of Management Reporter that you're currently using. But if you're using a tree, you'd click on this option down over here to be able to see the different organizational levels. If you want to rerun a report, say somebody went and say you wanted to be able to run it for a different time frame, you would be able to choose that option and run it for a different time frame. You can click on the Go To button and allow you to jump to different pieces of the report. You can click on the Show button and it allows you to see the charts, the comments, the headers and footers, and then you can create a summary view. You can send individual reports to XPS. Previously, when you were trying to print from a web viewer, your only option was to actually go up to File, Print, and then would only print one page at a time. So if you had a report that was multiple pages, that wasn't quite so helpful. And then you also have the ability to actually download an individual report to Excel as well. So some of these other screens are just kind of showing you, if you click on this report option, it's going to allow you to change the report date. If you click on, oops, let's go back one. Once you have multiple reports open, you can open reports side by side in your web viewer, because now they're individual panels, and I'll show you an example of being able to use the Snap to Windows feature with Windows 7 or Windows 8. Windows 7 I think it came out with. And you can, snap your reports so that you can see them side by side. How you can use the Go To option, and then it will show you all of the description and TOT lines that are in your report and allow you to kind of jump through your report real quick. And if you click on the Show button, it gives you the option to maybe do just summary lines only. So you can take a very detailed report and actually break it down into just the TOT lines and the description lines from your row definition. So it'll take a detailed report and make a very summarized report quickly. Some of these options are only available if you do them in the web viewer. Some of these options are available if you do them in the web viewer or the desktop viewer. All right. So also from the web viewer, I wanted to, give you that breakdown from the print, that if you click the print button, it gives you the option now to choose whether you wanted to do financial account or transaction level. Previously, you really didn't get those options. So with the CU15, that's one of the nice features that they've added, that they've really enhanced the printing functionality from the web viewer. You can also change the portrait if you want to fit to page. So it gives you a lot better way of making sure that when you print, the format looks nice. Okay? You do have the ability to drill down directly from the web viewer back into Management Reporter, or excuse me, into your ERP package, whether that be AX, SL, GP. If you're on an account level, you can click on the account, and then basically what it's going to do is it's going to open up the detail inquiry screen. Now, if you're in GP, this is what it would actually look like, where it would actually open the individual account, and it would choose the time frame that you had selected in the column that you were in. So if that was a month of column, that would just show month of. If that was a year-to-date column, it would show you that. If that was a quarterly column, it would show you quarterly. Now you're in GP. You can click on the functionality just as if you were in GP. You can click on the journal, click back to the journal entry. If that journal entry had source document, you could take it all the way back to the source document and take a look at where did that information actually come from. Why does my budget not equal my actual? Why are we so far off? Okay, great way to be able to do troubleshooting. All right, so at this point I'd like to jump in and start doing the demo. And then we'll come back for questions. Okay, so I'm already in Designer, so you can see my panels over here on the side. I happen to already be in the groups. Down here is where my security is, so we'll go into security first. Now, this might not be so exciting because I am in my virtual image and I don't have a whole lot of users to be able to set up. But essentially, I'm in security. If I click my new button, all right, it's going to pop up this screen. So if I click on search, I can start typing in a partial, hit check names, and it's going to find out. Now, if you have 5 Joes and you type Joe, it's going to show you a list of the 5 Joes, and then you can pick the Joe that you want. Okay? So once you add your user, now you can choose the role that you want them to be a part of. So if you choose designer, you'll see that you've got your checkboxes over here. Okay? If you choose them to be a viewer, you'll notice that you've got different, and I can't check any of these. So they are what they are. You don't get to choose what other extra permissions you want that person to actually have. Okay? So if you say you want them to be a designer, now you'll notice if I say that I want this person to be an administrator, if I come over here to company access, by default they have everything. Okay? But if I come over here as a viewer, they don't have rights to anything, and I can't even give them rights to anything, okay, because it's all grayed out. Where if I actually give them rights as a generator, now I can come over here and I can choose which company I want them to have rights to, okay? So whether you do this here or if you come over to a group and say you want to actually create a group, you can assign group access as well. So you have to kind of sit down and think about, well, what kind of groups would I want? And users can be part of multiple groups, so you could set up various different types of groups. Maybe you want just an access group for company A and an access group for company B. And the only thing that you're doing at that point is assigning which company they have rights to, and then you add users to that group. So if you need to add users or delete users from a group, then you could, just maintain that group. And then maybe you have a designer group, or maybe you have, you could use the same thing. Maybe you have to kind of sit down and think about, well, what kind of things do you really, how tight do you need to be with security? And maybe you just have a designer company A group, designer company B group, and then you can assign the security that way. It kind of all depends, but that's definitely something that we could have a conversation about, and I could help you design if you needed to kind of come up with a best case scenario for how you want to set things up. All right, so essentially, if you wanted to set up a new group, you would just click on the drop down here and scroll down to group, and then just give it a name. And then once you give it a name, you can add your appropriate users. Now you'll notice I'm only seeing users that are already set up. I'm not seeing all the users in my Active Directory. I'm only seeing the users that you've previously set up in Management Reporter. Okay, so once you have your group set up, you can actually come over here then to groups. Now here's a whole listing of all my report definitions. One of the things that I usually like to do to clients when I do their training is I usually like to pull in their default report. So a lot of you may already have these in here, and you have the default reports in here. If you don't, you can pull in default reports by going to Tools and Import Default Reports, and it will allow you to bring in, any default reports. If you're going to do that, that's fine. You can have a folder in here that has them all. But now you've just added a whole group of 1, 2, I don't know, 15, 20 reports in here that are really, they're just demo reports. So one of the things that I like to do with all of the default stuff, so whether it be rows, columns, trees, I like to rename them and I put a Z in front. Okay? And the reason for that is when you're doing lookups for things and you want to choose various different rows, columns, trees, or reports to be included in whatever it is that you're trying to add it to, it usually does it by alphabetical order. And it does not take into account the folder structure. So for example, if I were to create a brand new group, okay, so it just brings up a group like this, and I go to click Add, this is going to bring this up in alphabetical order. Well, I don't want to see all my default reports. So if I rename them, it'll make them sync to the bottom. Okay, so it's still a good way of being able to have all that stuff in there and not have it not be getting in your way. Okay, so now all your reports will float to the top. And I've even been known to put ones in front of my names of my reports so that the ones that I use most frequently, float to the top. Okay? So the same thing kind of happens when you're in, if you were to open up an individual row or you were in a report definition, and I click on the drop down here to see them all, this is where renaming all your row definitions and putting Z's, it puts them to the bottom as well so that you're not having to shuffle through all of those sample reports. Or excuse me, sample rows or even columns. Same thing. Okay? So now it's not a necessity. You don't have to do that, but that's just one of the things that I like to do to change things up a little bit so that I don't have to mess with all of the default stuff, but I still have it all available. It's just not in my way. It's kind of like, having a little space and shoving things in the closet when company comes over. Okay. Okay. So back over here, report groups. I'm actually going to open one that I already have created. I have one that's called monthly reports, and you can see here I've got three reports in here, and all I did to add those was click the add button, and then you can use the shift key or the control key to select different IDs that you want to add to this report. Just hit your OK button, and it will add those here. Now you'll notice you have move up and move down. So by default, it's going to try and put them in alphabetical order because that's the way it's listing them. But if you need one report to run before another report, or think about this, how do you want your reports, if you were to export all of these reports into an Excel file, and they all went into one Excel book, how would you want all of those reports to be ordered? What tab order would you want them to be? The way you have them listed here is the order that they will show when you export them to Excel. So if you really don't care what order they actually run, but you do care what order people actually see them, make sure you put them in the right order here. That's a nice tip. All right. So you can use your move up and move down keys to put them in the right order. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is your report group over here is when you have this checkbox selected, it says override company detail and date settings from the individual report definition. All right, so here is the report definition, right? You'll notice that this looks very similar. Here's my company, here's my detail level, my provisional level, and then here is my default base period, right? Now I am in a demo company, so I have some really funky default base periods set up, C+23. More than likely, you have probably set up with something like maybe CUR or maybe even S-1, which stands for System -1 or even System. Okay, so if you look at your report date down over here, mine says 9/22. If I were to change that to S1, you can see that the default comes in at August. Okay, now if I change this to current, you can see that it's changing again. Now current is going to be whatever your processing date is in your company selected for your general ledger. Okay, so if you're very good about keeping your fiscal periods closed and whatnot, and you know, you current. But in this case, clearly my demo company is not very current because my current processing period is 2014. All right, so this is just the default, and we all know that on a report definition, we can always just come in here and override this and choose whatever time frame we want to run this individual report for. This default just happens to be when you open it, what does it default to, right? So why I'm showing you all of this is because if we switch back over here into my report group, if I deselect this, you'll notice that my date range disappears. So now it is going to use whatever the default date is on the individual reports that are listed in my report group. So this can be very important because sometimes we like fruit salad and sometimes we want everything just to be an apple pie, right? We want to make sure that if we have 3 reports that we are comparing apple to apple on dates and that we're not comparing 12 December 2014 or if I put this back to C plus 23, oh, it doesn't even like me to do that. That, you know, and that came up as whatever date that came out. Let me close that and reopen it again and we'll see what date that was. That's coming, well, okay, that's coming and defaulting with 12/15, but if we have another one that's set as default that it's S1, we're going to get some reports that give us December 2015 and some reports that give us August of 2016. Now the other thing I want you to notice is that when you don't check this, it's all or nothing. It's all the dates and the company, the detail level, you know, and so on. So if you need to run a whole bunch of reports for historical purposes, then, and you don't want to run them all independently, then you do need to check this box and choose this. If you want to be able to override what all of these detail levels are, what company, then, you know, whatever, then you need to check this so that you can do that. But if you need one report to show you financial and one report to show you financial and account level, then you need to, the only way to do that is to deselect this and let the individual reports that are in take over as to what the detail level is going to be. Okay? So that means that you need to double check and make sure that your default dates are going to give you the right date that you would want. So that's where it's going to be important that, you know, if you're running these on a monthly basis and it's pretty consistent and you can use the default date, it's probably more of a bigger problem, issue, if you're trying to run historical and you need different things or whatever, because you don't want to have to go back and change all of these default dates to be, you know, a historical year. All right, so coming back over to your report group, so that might be another reason why maybe when you run certain reports you need the financial and the account level, but sometimes when you run it you just need the financial level. That might be another reason why you have different report groups created. Okay, there's lots of different reasons to create report groups, and if you need assistance with trying to figure out, well, how many do I need or whatever, we can definitely help you with that. All right, so don't struggle with it. I mean, if you need help, then reach out and we can help you get that. We can get that set up. All right, so that's that's the report group tab. The second tab I want to show you is this group distribution tab. Now you saw in my email or in my slide deck how I had the group distribution, right? So this is the group distribution. Here's a link to all the 3 reports that I had in my report group. If I come back here to Designer, those are my 3 reports, right? So this group distribution, where do you want that in the library? Now we haven't really talked about the library, so let's jump into the library real quick and talk about that so you can actually see where that's actually coming into play. And I actually have the desktop viewer open. For those of you that are not familiar with the icons, the viewer versus the designer. Okay, now if you needed to, you could come over and you could find the icons, you know, in your desktop. If you're happen to be using like a Windows 8 or Windows 10, you could find the icons there as well. I just happen to pin them to my desktop. You can, if you want, you could right-click and pin to your taskbar or to your start menu so that those would show up in your menu and you don't have to go through that as well. And I actually do have them pinned down here for me as well. All right, so I'm going to go into the viewer, and you can see here I've got the two panels I was telling you about. Here's the report library and then the report data. Now the report data won't let me check on it because I don't really have any reports open at this point. So if I double click on this, it's actually going to open this report, and now you can see that I'm in the report data versus the report library. And then I could click on another report, and now I've got that report open. So if I click on my window up here, I can see that I've got two different reports open. Okay? All right, and I can always come back to the library. Now you'll notice that they're in the exact same instance of this desktop viewer. Okay, and you'll see that, you know, I don't have two of those open. Where if you generate a report and you tell it to go to the desktop viewer, and then you generate another one, and you tell it to go, that you might end up with a whole bunch of instances. It's kind of like when you have multiple instances of Excel open or multiple instances of Word open. Every time you open a file, it'll open up a new instance. When you do it within the viewer and you open a report, it does it in the same instance, and you need to use your window option up here to flip back and forth between them. Okay? All right. So we're in the report library. Now this directory structure can be anything that you want it to be. All right. I just happened to create a year folder, and I put a 1 in front so that it would come up to the very top. So if you had, you know, lots of different folders up here, keep them alphabetically. And then in here, I created an individual year, and I put all my fiscal periods in there. Okay. By default, the only one that has rights to this is the administrator. So this is where you're going to need to make sure that you give your users rights to be able to come in and publish things to these folders. So if you create all these folders and you don't give your designers rights to these folders, the only rights they have are to this public folder down here at the bottom. So what's going to happen is if they're back here in Designer and they've listed out a path, or somebody else listed out a path because they had rights to it, and then they go to try and generate this report, it's going to give them an error, and it's going to give them a permission error. Essentially, it's going to say something about not having permissions or whatever. So that's where you're going to need to come on over here, and you're going to need to give your users rights to these folders. Now, usually with designers, depending on how big your company is and what this actually looks like, a lot of times I'll just come in here to the library, root of the library, and you can click on permission, or you can do a right click and say report library permissions, and then I'll just add my users right there so that if you create any new folders, they automatically have rights to it. Okay? But if you don't want them to have rights to those, then maybe you just come in here and, for example, maybe your viewers, you don't want them to have rights to the everything, and heaven forbid we don't want them to have rights to the draft folder, because that's where we're going to start running our day 1, day 2 reports to. Maybe we just give them rights to the year folder, and that's why I created the year folder, so that I could assign security here, and as if I create new years, they automatically have rights to those folders. So you don't have to worry about every year going back and fixing the rights. All right? So if you come in here and you say, I want to do the library permissions, so now you can see we're on the year folder, and at this point, now you could just add your user group, or excuse me, your viewer group. Okay? And you'll notice that they don't have rights to do anything but view it. Okay, so depending on the different types of groups that you can create and the different types of folders you can create, you can secure these very tightly so that as you're publishing reports to various different folders, only the people that have rights to the groups that you've assigned will be able to actually open those reports. Okay? All right, so one of the things I always like to do is also create a draft folder. This way, as you're generating your reports and you have, say you're just generating one report and maybe you're just kind of doing some formatting changes, or even if you're in day 1, day 2 of close or whatever, and it's not anything you know you're going to keep because 5 minutes later after you post that journal entry, you're going to run this thing again. You don't need all those versions of those reports in the Management Reporter database, but unfortunately it's always going to save it into the Management Reporter database somewhere, right? So if we put it somewhere that we can find it later, it's going to be easy to go and find the versions of the things that we don't want. And then we can delete them and get them out of our database. Because SQL does not play nice in the sandbox. When it takes resources, it doesn't give them back. Even when you delete information out of your Management Reporter database, it doesn't give those resources back to your SQL, back to the server. Once SQL hogs the space, it keeps it until it needs more. Unless you go back on behind the scenes and you run some commands, as an administrator of the SQL Server to shrink the database back down. All right, so what we're trying to do in this scenario is we want to keep our databases from getting way too big. And so what you're going to do is, if you're going to save your reports to the draft folder, then anything in this draft folder you can actually delete. Okay? And I'm looking like I'm starting to run out of time here, so I'm going to start picking up my pace here a little bit. I want to go back over into my group distribution, and this is where you can choose where you want your group distribution to go. Okay? So maybe you want this to go to the draft for right now because you're not doing anything with it. So on the group, you can say you want the group distribution to go to one folder, but then you can make your reports go somewhere else. So I want to jump back over here really quick because I want to show you in my folder I have a group distribution. See how that says report groups, and then I have the individual reports. They do not have to go in the same folder. A lot of times they do, but they don't have to. If you have a particular reason why you don't want those to go in the same folder, you can choose that they go in different folders, and you would do that here. You could put the group distribution in one place, and then when you get to the report distribution, you can say override the individual reports, use the group location, which would use this, or you can say, nope, I want these to go somewhere else. So you could have the group distribution go to one folder and the generated reports go somewhere else. Okay, so those are the different options for being able to choose where things actually go in the library. So before I run out of time, I actually want to go in here into the trees as well, and I want to show you how to add things to the trees. So I'm going to just kind of shrink stuff down a little bit so you can actually see. I'm going to hide my navigation bar so you can see everything part of this tree. This happens to be that departmental tree that I was telling you guys about. Over here in column L is your unit security. So say you have users that should be able to only be able to get into each of these departments, but you've got users that shouldn't be able to see everything. All right? If you double click over here, you can pick your users, and again, this is where your groups can be very handy, and sometimes they might even be a one-to-one relationship, but you can pick your viewer or whatever group you've got set up, and then you'll notice down here it says add security to the children reporting units. Well, if I was up on the top unit, these are all my children because they all roll up one, right? So if I come in here and I can say, well, okay, add my administrator and add them all the way down. Okay, so it's going to add it to everything. If I didn't do that, and I only pick the one, then it's going to only put it on that level. So if you have a tree that has lots of levels, you can just pick the parent level, and it'll go to the children, then pick the next parent level, it'll go to the children as well. Okay? And then the same thing when you need to remove things. If this was all the way down, and then you decide you need to remove that group for whatever, you can do it both ways. Okay, so it's very easy to be able to manage the security within a tree. All right, and so before I totally not leave any time for questions, now that it's 1 o'clock, Kim, did you want to open it up for questions really quick?
You bet. There are not any questions in the queue right now, so that's a good thing. But if you do have anything that you want addressed by Annette here during the call, type that in on the right-hand side under the questions area.
Or if you want to open it up and and unmute people. Maybe we might get a couple more that people can't type as fast.
Okay. Don asked the questions, how do you delete versions?
Oh, sorry, I totally skipped that part. Yes, that'd be important, right? All right, so if you're in your draft folder, right, and you do a right click and you see that there's lots of versions in there, so you could either do individuals like this and hit delete, and it'll get rid of those, or if you come up here and you hit delete, you can say most recent version or all the versions, and it'll get rid of everything. That's, you know, if you've got a lot of stuff in the draft folder, you can just highlight everything in the draft folder and hit delete, and it'll get rid of everything. And then as you publish things and you know that, you know, if you're using your report groups and you say, okay, now I know this is final, and you're putting it into the various different folders, you know, you should only have individual things in there, and then anything in the draft folder you can just get rid of.
Excellent.
Hopefully that answered your question enough. I'm trying to be brief and quick, so if there's more questions, we can get them answered.
Nope, no other questions from the queue.
Did we want to unmute people and see if anybody had?
Well, it's kind of hard when we've got so many in it. That's the hard part about it.
Yeah, because they've got background noise.
Here's another one that just came in. In an XPS version or viewer or web viewer report can be saved as a PDF file.
Yes. So if you download, I believe so, let's try it, see if it works. Nothing like trying things in live demo mode. All right, so if we open this and then print, yeah, look, see, printer. So yes, even though you send it to an XPS file, if you've got a PDF printer installed, then you can just print that right to a PDF.
Excellent. All right. Well, any last words of advice for that before we let folks go?
If you need help, let us know, because, you know, don't let this get too big. I mean, I've seriously had people call, you know, after they've been on this for a couple of years, and they're like, why is my management reporter database 50 gigs? And it's because they have so much stuff in here. We do have tools. We have some scripts that we can actually maybe even set up, depending on if you don't want anything ever to save in your database or in your library. We do have some tools, some scripts that we can set up as jobs that would essentially go out in whatever time frame you choose to run that job on the SQL Server. It'll go delete all of your extra reports out of the library. So, you know, depending on how you want to do things, a lot of times I like people to try and use this draft method so that you can keep it on the front end versus having to do things on the back end and just have everything wipe out completely. But it all depends on how you have things set up here and how you want to create your directory structure. So hopefully you guys got enough out of that to realize what it's capable of doing, even if you don't remember exactly how to do it. And again, if you want copies of the PDF,
here that,
oh yeah,
that Brandon just typed in at the end, and then we'll leave with that. And it is recently migrated FRX to MR. How come I don't see previously generated reports in the MR library?
Well, any report that you would have created in FRX does not bring over. It only brings over the specifications to reports. So generated reports that you had from FRX, that's not migrated over. Is that what your question is? So if you had a historical listing of reports and you want that in Management Reporter, you're going to have to go back and regenerate those reports for those historical years.
Okay.
But I would set up your library first.
There you go. Thank you so much, Annette, as always. You can feel your passion on MR. That was really fun. Thank you so much.
All right, you guys have a great afternoon.
You know, they'll be putting a copy of this recording out on our YouTube. You will get a copy of the link to get you there, so do look forward to that. And secondly, if you want a copy of her slides, please email me. You can do that by just going user experiences at Interdyne BMI, and I'll get you a copy of those. Thanks so much. Great job, Annette. Thank you, everybody. Here's her contact information. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.